All right, it is time for another banging video where we're going to provide you legal analysis of trending politics, policies, personalities, and pop culture to empower you with the information you need to defy this unjust legal system. Now, today, what we're going to look at in some detail is how blacks can stop being victims of a racist criminal justice system. After we go through this, I'm going to assume that hearing the information that we're going to share today, you will know for a certain that the criminal justice system is filled with racism from top to bottom. And we're trying to give you the information you need so that you will not be its victims. So stay with us as we get into this very urgent and critical topic. All right, let's do it. Let's do it. I am Augustus Corbett, a.k.a. the Minister of Justice, and I have the pleasure of sitting with today.
I am Attorney Chloe Corbett, a.k.a. the Duchess of Justice.
And together, we are the Defiant Lawyers, and as I said earlier, we bring you a video every week where we do a legal analysis of whatever's trending, whether it's politics, policies, personalities, or pop culture, even pop culture. And I don't know a whole lot about pop culture, but Chloe educates me on pop culture because there's some juicy stuff in pop culture that is very instructive on legal matters. So you've seen our videos on various, like for example, the Tory Lance trial. We did a video on that and many others having to do with pop culture. But the point is, we want to give you the information you need to defy this unjust legal system, especially if you're a melanated person. That's the whole goal. And we don't do what the news broadcasters do. The journalists give you a 5-second headline and then a 2-minute synopsis of an issue. You can't understand these issues with just that. We go into depth. We go into detail giving it to you. Now, it's up to you whether or not you take advantage of it. I hope you do. Well, with all that said, let me remind you to subscribe, share, like, and comment. Ring the bell so that every time we do one of these banging videos, you will get notification. Chloe, with all of that said, how are you today?
I am doing well, Dad. I'm so happy to be here with you discussing this topic, having another video. And today I want to let our viewers know that we were recognized by a local AAU basketball team for our contribution to the local community here. So I will be attending that game later today on behalf of Corbin and Corbett to accept our recognition. And we were invited to seat front side, court side. So I'm very excited to do that right after this broadcast too.
All right. Awesome. Yeah, great. Very good. So let's get right into it. We got so much to share. So much to share in such a little time. I do want to say this. Last week we talked about the Dominion versus Fox $1 billion defamation lawsuit that's going on in the court system. It's not as juicy as some of the other topics. We can tell that by the number of viewers and comments that we got. It was down typically from what we usually get. And I think it's because folks just don't understand the gravity of this case. It may be the largest defamation lawsuit in American history. I mean, there are two, one case, the Dominion case is about almost $2 billion against Fox News. And then there's Another one, I think the plaintiff is Smartmatic. It's over $2 billion against Fox News. And Fox News is one of the greatest, absolute, when I say greatest, the largest, most influential cable news network in the country. And it has to do with a former president. It has to do with Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham, who are sometimes they have the most viewers of all cable news outlets. So this is a big deal. This is a big deal. So we encourage you to go and watch that video. We had to cut it short because we dealt with some inclement weather last week, and we thought we would do the second part of it. But you know what? If you listen to that hour-and-a-half video we did, you'll get the gist of everything. So, Chloe, with that said, I guess we're ready to move on. Do you have any more introductory comments?
No, but we are discussing a huge topic about racism in the criminal justice system and how it victimizes and negatively affects Black people disproportionately. And we want to go through from the beginning to end how our criminal, and I call it injustice system, unfairly victimizes Black people. So I'm ready to get into it, to discuss it, to break it down so that our viewers will understand the system and the racism that we're still dealing with to this day and that we see every day in our practice as well.
Just reminds me that all this rhetoric coming from conservatives about anti-wokeness is really foolishness when it comes to African Americans. We have to be woke, and that is the purpose of this channel, quite frankly, is to awake African American people and justice-minded whites and other races of people so that America can be the great country that it certainly has the capacity to be. So, yes, we need to be woke. We need to stay woke. We need to be aware of what is going on, what is happening in our political, in our economic, in our medical, healthcare, education systems. We cannot afford to be asleep like they're trying to get us to do. All right, that said, so Chloe, I think this statement here sort of sums up the criminal justice system and the racism that it deals with. The evidence of differential treatment and injustice in the justice system, in quotations, is overwhelming. And Chloe, that comes not from you and me and other African American lawyers or activists. That comes from the American Bar Association. That is their conclusion. These are the lawyers across the country. The American Bar Association is like the American Medical Association. It is representative of attorneys throughout the United States of America. And that group has gone on the record to say that the evidence of differential treatment and injustice in the, quote, justice system, I like the way you say it, Chloe, injustice system, is overwhelming.
Yeah, it is. And, you know, as we discuss this topic today, that I'm going to be picturing that we are, prosecutors or plaintiffs' attorneys, where we have the burden to present this evidence to our viewers, to anyone who listens to us. And we're going to show clearly from top to bottom how the evidence and injustice is overwhelming. So, guys, think of this like you are sitting in a jury box. We are the plaintiff's attorneys or the prosecutors. We have the burden to present evidence to you all on our cause of action. And our cause of action today is how the criminal justice system has victimized, caused injury to Black people. So we're going to prove that to you from beginning to end. So this is like our opening statement. This is our opening statement of what we expect the evidence to show, and you're going to see it in detail as we continue to go through this conversation.
I love that approach. I love that approach. So we are presenting our evidence to you, our subscribers and friends, and even contrarians. We are presenting the evidence to show that the criminal justice system is corrupt toward African Americans from top to bottom. Some folks are going to come to the conclusion, Chloe, that the reason African Americans have worse outcomes in the criminal justice system is because African Americans, at worst, this is going to sound comical, but people actually believe this, at worst, African Americans have some sort of a criminal gene or a crime gene, or at least African Americans are predisposed to crime. And that's why we are so overrepresented in the criminal justice system. Both are false. The first is foolishness. The second one is false. Okay? All right, all that said, let's do it. So what we're going to do, Chloe, is we're going to walk folks through each stage of the criminal justice system. Okay, we're going to walk them through it. We're very well aware and very familiar. We're, you could say, experts in the criminal justice system because we have many, many, many clients currently in the criminal justice system here in the state of Texas. And so we know a thing or two about the criminal justice system. So the first place that we want to start today are with the legislatures, the people who are in the state legislatures who are sort of thinking up all types of crimes and procedures and rules that just impact African Americans disproportionately. Chloe?
Yeah, we about a year ago we made a video about pig laws in which we described unfair, unjust laws that penalized poor Black people for crimes such as "quote unquote" stealing a farm animal, or there were vacancy statutes that made it a crime to be unemployed. And these pig laws were put into place by legislatures, after enslaved Black people were freed in the mid 1800s, and we're trying to build a community up. Going from enslaved to now being free, we were not giving our promise of 40 acres and a mule. So we were having to build our own communities, build businesses, acquire property. And so they put these so-called pig laws into place that made it a crime just to be unemployed. I mean, that is devastating. And those type of pig laws, unfair laws, have trickled down into this century as well, where you still have laws in place made by legislatures that disproportionately affect African Americans, or that make offenses illegal that have a disproportionate negative effect on the African American community. So it all starts with the law, because if there's no law in place to penalize it, then there's no "quote unquote" crime. So, and this is important too, that the legislatures, they're voted into office. They are elected officials. There are people that have been voted by members of the community who they represent. So this is why we always preach in almost every video why voting is so important, because the people who we have in office are the ones who are writing these laws that victimize and discriminate against the Black community, and that needs to change with our votes.
Well said. Well said. So, yes, and as you were talking about that, I started thinking about laws during Jim Crow, for example, contract labor. That's where corporations could go and actually buy the freedom of Black inmates who had been in prison for something, as you said, as simple as vagrancy, not, standing in a crowd, not having a job. They would get arrested and get sent to prison, and then corporations could come and buy their labor for pennies on the dollar, which was really another form of slavery. So I like the way Joe Madison of Sirius XM Radio says, we're not dealing now with Jim Crow, we're dealing with James Crow Esquire, okay? So he has on a suit. He knows not to use the N-word. He carries a briefcase, or she. But they are perhaps even deadlier. Someone like Ron DeSantis, okay? He is a perfect example of James Crow Esquire. All right. So yeah, we're gonna look at the various stages of the criminal justice system. We just commented on legislatures. We're gonna talk about cops, stops, searches, arrests, bonds, investigators, prosecutors, grand juries, judges, regular juries, executions, or the death penalty. So you folks, go ahead, get you something to drink, kick your feet up, stay with us throughout this broadcast. It's going to be good. I'm telling you, it's going to be good. If you've had any dealings in the criminal justice system or a family member, you always can, even if you haven't. You need to be aware. You need to be educated on how this system can get you caught up real fast. All right? All right, that said.
Before we move on, Dad, you mentioned Ron DeSantis. And before we move on from legislators, there is a bill that is going through the Florida House, which is basically Ron DeSantis wants to ban diversity and inclusion programs on college campuses and in Florida schools. And the impact of this bill, if it passes, which it likely will because of the makeup of Florida politics and who its governor is.
Back to legislators,
Back to legislatures is currently going through the legislature in Florida now. I mean, it could affect having Black fraternity and sororities on college campuses. You know, it would ban teaching diversity and inclusion in secondary school as well as college classes as well. It could potentially ban, teaching the true history of racism and slavery in this country, anything related to Black people, and teaching what we've had to overcome and teaching true history. That's what they intend to ban with this bill. And so, guys, voting is so important. Voting matters. And that's why our legislature matters. And if this passes in Florida, there's other conservative states who are taking the same type of actions to ban diversity and inclusion programs in our schools, and it's likely going to flow across red states in America as well. So keep your eyes peeled out for it. It could be very harmful.
Well, we're going to see how important diversity is in just a moment as we matriculate through these various stages of the criminal justice system. Chloe, I'm so happy you mentioned that because, Florida, like our adopted state here of Texas, and other conservative states around the country are enacting all kinds of crazy, racist, blatantly racist laws. Mississippi is another example that has essentially is trying to create another justice system in the most populated city in the state of Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi. So they're trying to create a separate criminal justice system, a separate court system with their own judges, their own financing, to bypass that majority Black city of Jackson, where many of the judges, the attorneys, the prosecutors, etc., the mayor are African Americans. My concern, we're going to get in this. My concern is the average and even educated, from top to bottom, African American really don't understand what we are facing. That concerns me more than anything else. That's the purpose of this channel. Because many just don't get it. They're not in it like we're in it every day, and they don't see this. I mean, okay? And so I'm so concerned that so many Blacks don't get it. They don't get it. And those of us who try to point it out to them, they don't want to hear it. We're race baiting. We're being divisive. We are, stirring up trouble. If you all could get the calls that we get every day, of some sort of racism, something crazy that has happened to some African American. You would see things, and you know what? Those are anecdotals, all right? Don't base anything based on the calls we get. Do your research. And because some of you won't do your research, we did it for you. So let's go and look at some of this information. Cops. So we'll start with cops. Black drivers made up a smaller share of those stopped at night when it's more difficult to discern the race of a driver, which suggests that racial bias may influence stop decisions. For example, in Texas, about 25% of all drivers stopped right before sunset were black, compared to about 20% just after dusk. The analysis found the same basic pattern across all the stops in aggregate. Overall, the data show about a 5 to 10% drop in the share of drivers stopped at night who are black. All right, so we okay. Let's comment on that. Why is this important? This is important because typically the first encounter with the criminal justice system is with the cop.
And we know, where that law enforcement developed from slave patrols to enslave black people, less than 150 years ago. And so that just trickled down from slave patrols, and that mindset, went from generation to generation into law enforcement in the type of policies that are in these local and state and federal police departments, the way that officers interact with black people. In recent years, there's kind of been more of a focus on de-escalation and having officers live in the black community and understand black people. But that's after we have protested and after we have demanded it. And as we just read, the fact that about 25% of drivers stopped right before sunset were black, compared to about 20% just after dusk. And it found that this basic pattern occurs across all the stops in aggregate. I mean, that number has to change. That number right there just shows what we're saying, that from the minute that most black people encounter the cops or police officer, is likely going to be a negative encounter. And we're going to talk about how it leads to more arrests and heavier charges, etc. So the hunters and the prey, the hunters and the prey. The cops are the hunters, and unfortunately, a lot of times, black people are disproportionately the prey.
Very good. And this is coming from the Stanford, Open Policing Project. All right. Okay. So the next slide. Go from cops to stops, but still it involved cops. So the Stanford Open Policing Project, Chloe, if you can go with this.
Yes, in a data set of nearly 100 million traffic stops across the United States, black drivers were about 20% more likely to be stopped than white drivers relative to their share of the residential population. The study also found that once stopped, black drivers were searched about 1.5 to 2 times as often as white drivers, while they were less likely, listen to this, you all, while they were less likely to be carrying drugs, guns, or other illegal contraband compared to their white peers. So 100 million traffic stops. Think about that. One, that's a huge number. That's a lot of traffic stops. And we know a lot of it, or if you don't know, a lot of the traffic stops are related to municipalities, getting money from the traffic stops. So basically, municipalities and cities are getting money for disproportionately stopping and searching black people. But that's a whole other topic that we can go into.
No,
But
please,
out of the
please, Chloe, go into it. I mean, Because one thing we need to let folks know is before you and I started practicing together, you were a prosecutor for a municipality, for the city of Dallas. So you have literally dealt firsthand with Dallas cops, with Dallas police officers who were out doing these disproportionate stops. I mean, you had to take their cases and make a prosecutorial decision about whether there's evidence here and so forth to move forward or not. So, I mean, let's talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, I saw it firsthand, Dad. I prosecuted traffic offenses here in our area, and I saw the amount of the traffic citation that would be issued between an encounter between a police officer and the defendant, and and by my role, a lot of the defendants could not or would not hire attorneys. So I would speak directly with the person who received the traffic citation. And a large majority of my docket were Black and brown people. And in those conversations with the Black and brown defendants who received those traffic citations, I mean, a $200 to $300 traffic citation could disproportionately affect their ability, they would tell me, to provide for their family. They just did not have the money, and because they could not pay the traffic citation here in Texas, in our area, if you don't take care of the citation or pay the citation, a warrant is issued. So I would frequently encounter a lot of Black people who would have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 warrants because they could not pay their traffic tickets. And if you have a $200 to $300 to $400 traffic citation, and you have several, that can equal thousands upon thousands of dollars. And then subsequently, when you can't pay the citation, you get the warrant, you end up going to jail, and oftentimes their licenses would be suspended or revoked. So it's like, okay, now you don't have a license. So if you have a family to provide
And
for,
and and, and may lose a job
and may lose a job,
and an apartment.
because then, yes, you're faced with, okay, either I don't go to work or I drive without a license and get another citation or arrested. So it's just this compounding effect that I would see. And also that so here in Texas, if you are a commercial driver and you have a commercial driver's license called a
Yeah.
CDL,
Mm-hmm.
just receiving a traffic citation could make your CDL license be revoked.
Mm-hmm.
And so they couldn't pay for it. They couldn't, just go into a driving safety course to get the case dismissed. It was either you pay for it and lose your license, or you go to trial and you hope that that we could not prove our case at trial. And a lot of those CDL drivers were over the truck drivers who were disproportionately African American and Black. So they would be faced with potentially losing their licenses and not being able to do their jobs, being truck drivers, which then would affect their ability to provide for their family. So this is what we're talking about. These stops between, officers and Black people are not just stops and searches and there it goes. Even a minor traffic offense can have a rippling effect for most Black people in this country.
All right. Now, let me talk a little bit about, the actual stop itself. So in order for a police officer to stop you, the police officer is to have or should have reasonable suspicion. There are 5 levels of proof that are in the court system. The very top is beyond reasonable doubt. And then there is clear and convincing evidence. Now that's more in family law type cases. Then there's a preponderance of the evidence. That's in civil cases. Then there is probable cause. That's in criminal cases. That's where you get arrested or searched if the cop thinks that there's probable cause. And then the lowest is reasonable suspicion. And that's not just because somebody looks uh, you know, suspicious, but the cop is supposed to be able to explain, articulate something that would, lead somebody to think, okay, that person had reasonable suspicion. The cop had reasonable suspicion in that case. And oftentimes they will try to get around that requirement by saying the person, I had one case, Chloe, where the cop wrote in his report that my client went about 2 inches over the white line when he came to a stop at the intersection. Or, they weaved into the middle lane a little bit. Just make up stuff, okay? And that's often where we have to file a motion to suppress, to force the prosecutor to prove that there was reasonable suspicion. All right? So my point is they must have reasonable suspicion for that stop to be legal. And then if they go on to the search, then they must have probable cause. And that requires even more. That requires facts and circumstances to suggest that a crime was committed and that the person committed the crime. All right? And this is subjective, but in some cases, it's pretty clear that there was no reasonable suspicion or definitely not probable cause. All right? Now, one of the things I like to tell folks, both of us, when they get stopped by the police, is, remain respectful. If you're in the car, the police here, at least here in Texas, has a right to your name, your driver's license, just basic stuff. You don't have to give any more than that. Your name, your address, just basic information. If you don't give them your name, then they can charge you with failure to ID. So you're required to give the name and all that, but you're not required to answer any other questions, but remain respectful either way. And as far as searches, Chloe, I know you dealt with this all the time when you were prosecuting those cases. We advise our clients not to consent to searches. What do you say?
Yeah, never consent to a search. The general rule is if a police officer wants to search you, he or she needs to have a warrant. There are exceptions to that if they see a crime committed in plain view, or there are other exceptions, but generally they must have a warrant. But if you consent to it, that's an exception as well.
Say that again. Say that again. That's so important. The general rule.
Yes, the general rule is that a police officer under the Fourth Amendment must have a warrant to search you.
Okay, stop there. Let's open that up a little bit, right? So
yeah.
So talk to us about, so the cop says, stop you and so forth, and then asks you, can I search your car? So you're saying that cop, the reason he's asking or she's asking is because he or she knows they need a warrant.
That's exactly right. And he or she knows that most people will say, sure, why not? Yes, you can search. Aha, there's their consent. So now, okay, you have consented to me searching your vehicle. Let me go through with it. If a cop is asking you to search your vehicle, then that means that they probably either don't have probable cause or they don't have a warrant. And if not, you need to say no, absolutely no. Now, here in Texas, there is an exception if the cop decides to arrest you, then they can do a search, as a result of your arrest to make sure there's no, guns or dangerous weapons. But if a cop comes up to your car, asks to search your car, they don't have a warrant, say no. Even if you know you don't have anything in the car, even if you know you have no contraband, nothing, you don't have to, and you should not consent to the search. Period.
Very good. Thank you for explaining that. What about this notion? Well, if I don't have anything in the car, then what's the harm in allowing him to search or her to search? You know, in my mind, look, let me just be honest. I don't trust them. Who knows whether or not they'll plant something in your car?
Yep.
Right? In your time as a prosecutor, did anything crazy like that happen to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge, but I have dismissed cases because a police officer did not have probable cause to stop the defendant or to do the search. And, I felt that I couldn't make my case because it was based on an illegal stop or search. And, if there's a good defense attorney, a good person on the other side, they would file a motion to suppress. Judge, the cop got this evidence, a violation of whatever amendment or whatever constitutional right. It's fruit of the poisonous tree. We're asking you to suppress it. So at that point, if this was a key piece of evidence, or if the stop was needed to pinpoint the person accused of the crime, with the crime, then I would just say, you know what, I'm just going to dismiss this case. And this is what people don't realize as well. The police, yes, they charge people, they arrest people, but it's the prosecutors who make the final decision about which cases are actually filed and whether or not those cases stay on the docket and whether or not to dismiss the case. We have to dismiss, or not we, I'm not a prosecutor anymore, but when I was a prosecutor, we had the power and the authority to dismiss the case, and I would do so a lot when
Very
necessary.
good. Very good. Now, you said a good attorney, a good defense attorney. Well, I don't want to throw my colleagues under the bus, but I must say, you know what? Let's talk about that when we get to prosecutors. All right?
Okay.
We'll come to that. I got some things to say about that. All right, let's go back to the research. So to sum this up, cops need reasonable suspicion to stop you. And then upon that stop, if they find that there's some contraband in plain view, or they arrest you, then they can take it on to the next level, either arrest you because now they got probable cause, or they can search. But if they're asking, that means obviously they don't have a warrant. They haven't had a chance to even go get a warrant, because they got to go to the police department and get in front of a magistrate and ask and swear out an affidavit and get the magistrate to issue the warrant, and by then you're gone. So that's why they ask, can I search your car? Because they know they don't have a warrant and can't get to one before that stop becomes illegal. And by the way, a stop should not last. Once they have basically cleared you and there are no warrants and they've checked you out and you haven't broken any law, it's time for them to let you go. It's time for them to let you go. They can hold you for a reasonable time, but it's time to, and you should ask them, okay, may I leave? Okay, can I leave at this point? And if they say, well, no, you're detained, okay, you're detained. But if it's, yeah, I mean, I'm just talking with you. Well, I'm out. Have a good day. Bye. That shouldn't last. If you don't have any warrants, if there's no probable cause, if all of that has been checked and confirmed, that stop should take a few minutes and you should be released to go. And you should ask whether you can leave. Okay?
Let me ask you this, Dad.
Yes, ma'am.
In terms of the search, before we move on. So let's say a person knows they have like some weed on them or something, and it's not legal in the state they're living in. And the cop asks them, well, do you have some weed on you? You got some drugs on you? What should they say in that moment? Should they admit to it? Should they, what should they say? Because that happens a lot too in cases we handle.
So they know they got some weed, right? And the cop asks them a direct question. Do you have any weed on you or in the car? Okay. I would be elusive. Okay. I would first ask, am I detained? Okay, you ask questions. Am I detained?
Yeah.
Right? Am I detained? No, you're not detained. Well, then I would like to leave. And leave. I mean, make sure you you're not doing something that they could say, well, you evaded arrest. But I would ask questions back. Am I under arrest? Am I detained? May I leave? Okay. Secondly, there is this little thing called the Fifth Amendment. This little thing, just this little bitty thing that was added to the Constitution called the Fifth Amendment. The framers in their wisdom said, we're not going to give the government the power to make you incriminate yourself. We're going to carve out an exception to the Constitution. So you have a right to remain silent. You don't have to answer that question. Don't do their job for them. If you got weed in the car, you don't have to say, well, yeah, I got a couple blunts, I got a pound, a quarter pound, dime bag, whatever, thinking, well, since I admitted it, they're going to be nice to me and let me go. No, 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 no. They will not. They will not. They're going to use that evidence against you. So there's the Fifth Amendment. Do not incriminate yourself. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, they're gonna charge me with lying. Well, if you ask questions and if you be quiet, you ain't lied. And incidentally, they lie to you all the time. Police officers, U.S. Supreme Court has given them the right to lie to try to get the information they need. So, ask them questions. Am I on the arrest? Am I detained? And if the cop is being a hardball about it, just be quiet. Sir, I'm not. I'm not required to answer your questions. I gave you my name. I gave you my address, but I'm not required. There's the Fifth Amendment. I have a Fifth Amendment right to be silent.
Listen to that, you all. Ask questions back. First being, am I detained? Am I free to leave? If you are detained, exercise your Fifth Amendment right and ask for an attorney. And then don't say anything.
And by the way, let's suppose you refuse to answer and you do have weed in your car, but there is no proof that you have weed in your car. There's not the smell of weed. He doesn't see any roaches, no paraphernalia, or anything like that. And let's say he goes on anyway and searches your vehicle or arrests you. Then Chloe and I are going to get that body cam, and we're going to see here, y'all listen to me carefully, we're going to see whether or not he had probable cause, okay, to search your vehicle. Somebody say, well, but they found the weed. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about the fact that they found the weed. We're talking about the fact that he didn't have probable cause to search your vehicle in the first place, nor did you consent. There was no smell of weed. There were no roaches or anything like that. He should not have even been in your vehicle because, again, that's assuming there's no probable cause and you didn't consent to it. So we'll fight to get that evidence thrown out.
Mm-hmm. And we do it we do it all the time.
All the time.
These cases.
And if he says, yeah, you're detained, okay, you can't leave, well, then the next thing, like Chloe said, you need to do is be quiet. And the next thing he needs to do is Mirandize you. He need to read you Miranda warnings, he or she. If he's detained you and has not Mirandized you and you remain quiet and you're not voluntarily just running your mouth, don't run your mouth.
Yeah.
Then here comes Chloe and I again filing a motion to suppress because they violated your Fifth Amendment right to be Mirandized. Okay?
Yep.
And if they forced you to talk, okay, then we're going to then at that point ask the judge to invoke the fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine if necessary. So help us help you by educating yourself.
Right.
Why do you think we're doing this? That's right. Be quiet. Be quiet.
Yep.
Be quiet.
Quiet. Be quiet. Be quiet.
There's no law against it. In fact, there's a law for it. Okay? So, all right. We'll go back to the slide. Okay. All right.
Yep. And speaking of arrests, in 800 jurisdictions across the United States, Black people were arrested at a rate 5 times higher than white people over a 3-year period ending in 2018, according to an ABC analysis of data voluntarily reported to the FBI. In 250 jurisdictions, Black people were 10 times more likely to be arrested than their white counterparts. So, in over 1,000 jurisdictions across the US, Black people are 5 to 10 times more likely to be arrested at rates higher than white people. Again, another piece of evidence of how the criminal injustice system in this country victimizes Black people. So we're going along. We're showing you with our opening statement in this conversation just how the criminal justice system has injured Black people in this country. Wow.
And go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying, wow. What are your thoughts, Dad?
Well, and I want to go back to something that you pointed out earlier in another slide, this slide, where this refutes this notion that Blacks have a criminal gene. It refutes the idea that, Blacks are predisposed to crime, because the research shows that Blacks are searched disproportionately, stopped disproportionately, and we just read arrested disproportionately, while Blacks were less likely to be carrying drugs, guns, or other illegal contraband compared to their white peers. So what does that mean? That means that cops are out there giving breaks to white people, even though white people are more likely to have drugs on them. They're more likely to have contraband on them. Yet they're getting breaks from the cops. Blacks, you typically not gonna get a break. You're gonna pay a tax. You're gonna pay that. You're gonna pay that black tax. As Chloe eloquently explained earlier, given her experience as a prosecutor, these cases make money for these cities. After the Michael Brown killing in Ferguson, Missouri, the Department of Justice did an investigation of that police department and found that like 7 out of 10 of the dollars that the city received came from poor Black folks. And, Chloe, you explained how that how that not only affects Blacks in the criminal justice system, but in their personal lives. And in the Louisville Metro Police Department, the Department of Justice just a week or so ago issued their findings that the Louisville Police Department is racist, and they too victimize Black people in Louisville, Kentucky. This happens wholesale. It's pervasive. It proves that there's systemic racism. It proves critical race theory is correct. It proves that we need to be woke. It proves it.
It does. So we've gone through from the laws that are written, the legislators, the cops, the stops the searches, and the arrests that Black people are more likely to be victimized and targeted simply because we are Black. So that's the first encounter with the criminal and justice system. And then what happens once a Black person is arrested? As you all see on the screen, we get higher bonds. Nationally, bail amounts are 34% higher for Black men and 19% higher for Latino men compared to their white counterparts. Reliance on a money based pretrial system, according to the Public Policy Institute and Pretrial Justice Institute, automatically disadvantages people of color who are more likely to be living in poverty. And look, those bail amounts are not just set arbitrarily. There are magistrates and judges who sit inside the jail who will look at each person who has been arrested and make a determination on what those bail amounts are. So it's not just arbitrary. It's not just a random. It's not randomized. It's a person sitting there, a person who may have biases and prejudices against certain people, against Black people. They see what the person is accused of, just simply accused, just arrested for, not convicted. They're presumed innocent, but accused of, and they make the decision for what the bail amount should be. And we just saw up on the screen how much higher bail amounts are set for Black people versus other the other people accused of offenses. So again, another piece of evidence to show how this system victimizes Black people.
I mean, that's why we started out with the blockbuster opening line, really the theory of our case, which is systemic injustice in the criminal justice system or injustice system is overwhelming. We're showing you what happens in this country every day to Black people, from cops, prosecutors, the magistrates who set the bonds. Okay? The proof is there. The proof is there. So yes, higher.
Proof is in the pudding.
Proof is in the pudding. Okay? What's next? Investigators and detectives. All right?
Wow.
Them too? Well, we don't even have to say a lot here. Just use your mind on this. Investigators and detectives are overwhelmingly white, and they essentially share the same biases that other cops share. So this reads, cops, including investigators, detectives, exhibit consistently higher levels of bias than members of the public overall and compared to other members of their own racial groups. Now, we got to stop right there. This says that cops have more racial bias, white cops, than white people in general. That's what this is. White cops have more racial bias than members of their own racial group. This is research. This is not my opinion. This is research. Now, watch this. This goes on to say, while Black people who were not police scored a much lower level of conscious bias than other racial groups, Black police displayed a higher explicitly pro-white or anti-Black bias than members of the Black community. Now, that is not hard to believe after we saw what happened to Tyree Nichols. Okay? So this says essentially Black cops don't have as much racial bias as white cops, but they have more than the average black person. Okay? And again, we saw that with Tyree Nichols. Those, and let me say this, those men who we saw beat Tyree Nichols to death are still presumed innocent. Although we saw what happened, the law still gives them the presumption of innocence. But the point is, though, that I'm trying to make is something seems like happens to people who become police officers. I don't know if they become jaded or what, but if they have more implicit racial bias than members of their same group who are not police officers, including some black cops, either the culture, the experience of dealing with probably the worst in society, cause these cops to just become jaded. All right. And, that's why cops need constant training, constant teaching, and some of them need to be fired, So wanted to bring
Yeah, I
that
think
up.
it's all of that dad, as well as a us versus them mentality. You know, the cops versus black people, or the cops versus the community that they are in. And, and a lot of it is based out of fear, I believe too. The otherism, the fear. For no just cause. Most times. Are there bad people, bad black people? Yes, bad
Yes.
white people, etc.
Yes.
There are. There
Yes.
are. But this overwhelming culture and mindset that I believe a lot of law enforcement has of us versus them, we're going into battle. That's why they have, these militarized style weapons and armor and things. I think that that does not help. And when you other someone and you fear a group of people, and you're not out in the community interacting with the community, and you don't live in the community, that plays a part into it as well. And because of that culture, I believe it attracts those type of white and black people as well, that are attracted to that type of field, what we just described above. So it's just the whole system needs to be changed about the way that law enforcement is handled in this country, and there needs to be new policies and laws back to the legislatures put in place, that will change those policies, which will likely change the culture as well.
So then it's not, bad apples on the tree. The tree is bad,
Yeah.
basically. Because everybody like to say, well, those are just bad apples. No, 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 no. The tree itself is bad. The actual
Yeah.
tree, from what we're seeing here, at least this is a reasonable inference. The tree corrupts the cops. All right. So they come in with their own inherent biases. And I must say, especially whites when they're dealing with blacks, but even some blacks. And then that implicit bias increases. I mean, just think about the system. You got this good old boy system. You got this blue line system. You got this, you don't squeal on your brother cop, your sister cop. You got this enormous power out there on the streets. It is a system that is given to increasing one's darker, proclivities. All right? Chloe,
Well, you
before
want to
we go,
talk about gangs.
go ahead.
I didn't mean to overtalk you, but you want to
Mm-mm.
talk about gangs. I mean, what you just described sounded like one. No snitching, don't
Wow.
go outside of the blue line, you know, all of this power, having violence on their side. It's just that the difference is that is government authorized, and they have a badge.
Wow.
So I mean, it's honestly sounds like two sides of the same coin.
Man.
And I'm sure a lot of people may not want to hear that a lot, but I mean, that's just the reality of it, and we have the evidence behind it to prove it as well.
Well, just look at the Tyree Nichols killing.
Yeah,
I mean, that says a lot. Or the Rodney King,
yeah.
if you can pull up a video. Before we move on, let's acknowledge a couple of our commenters and or subscribers. We welcome all
Hey,
of you to this conversation. Gwendolyn
yes.
Henson asks a very good question. Hey, y'all, what does the law say concerning the ability to do community work in cases where the defendant cannot pay? And thank you both. Love, love. And thank you, Gwendolyn, for tuning in. Um,
Thank you.
yes. Yeah, there are mechanisms for people to pay when they don't, for people to work when they don't have the money, and I think the the activists are pressuring police departments across the country to do more things like that. Um, Less cash bail and more, alternatives to cash, working. Um, for example, around here, someone can be released on work patrol. Okay. They can report every weekend or every Tuesday or what have you and work at some place, in order to get released. There are programs like that. All that depends on the nature of the charge, the seriousness of the charge, the judge you're dealing with, the county you're in, the prosecutor, so many factors. Okay, but yeah, there are programs out there like that, and I think more are on deck. Chloe, you
Yeah.
got something to add to that?
It also comes down to the judge too. These judges here in Texas, district judges have a lot of power in terms of what happens on a person's case. And for example, if a person goes on community supervision, which is Texas's term for probation, and restitution is ordered, which is where, you know, the person is ordered to pay money to try to restore the victim. Sometimes the judges will substitute, instead of paying money restitution, the defendant can do community service, and work in the community, work for some type of organization. That happens a lot in juvenile law as well, where you can petition the judge to say, my client cannot afford to pay restitution or pay these court costs or fees, so therefore, can they do community service? So it is possible, but it is in the judge's discretion mainly, mostly, and it really depends on how the judge views it and how they run their court as well. So there's a lot of moving factors to make that determination about working in the community.
Um, yeah, ditto to all of that. Um, okay, so with that said, let me read one more.
Thank you for that question.
Great question. One more comment. Um, 6-3, observing the facts. Good evening, Defiant Lawyers. Good evening to you as well.
Good evening.
There are a bunch
Thank
of
you for joining
fire
us again.
signs there. I presume that
Yes.
that 6-3 is enjoying this. We hope you are. We worked hard putting all this together because we want to empower you. We want to give you the information you need to defy this unjust legal system. That is why we say what we say every time we come on. All right? And then my sweetheart, your mother says, wow, research shows that although blacks are stopped disproportionately to whites, they are less likely to have drugs, guns, or contraband than their white counterparts. I know it
Hey, Mom.
because the narrative is blacks commit, so much of the crime, that blacks are predisposed to crime, that we are criminals, basically. That's not what the facts show. And we work so hard trying to Keep folks based on the facts, not emotions, not innuendo, not disinformation, not misinformation, not propaganda, none of that. The facts, just the facts, just the facts. Okay? All right, Chloe, we'll go now to prosecutors. You know, you know a thing or two about prosecutors. And I have them here as the gatekeepers. Why? Because once a person's case, let me see if I can explain this in a short period of time. Once a person's case once the police officer decides to make the arrest, the police officer is going to give the case to a detective or an investigator, and the detective is going to try to build a case against this person, contacting witnesses and contacting the person himself. And let us use this occasion to say, do not talk to the police. Do not do it, or to the detective or the investigator. Can you come down here? I want to ask you a few questions to get your side of the story. Do you mind doing a polygraph test? Do you mind giving us a sample of your DNA? And they may get your DNA just when you go down there and they give you a can of Coke, Coca-Cola that is, or Pepsi or some other soft drink or a glass of water. Well, your DNA is all over that now. And if they need some DNA evidence, you just gave it to them. So you respectfully decline or just ignore their request to go down and talk to them or to do a polygraph or anything else, okay? Never, ever, 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 ever do that. So let's assume you didn't do that. Or you did do that. Whatever you did is now a part of the detective's investigative file. He or she then turns that over to the prosecutor. Now, the prosecutor can look at it and say, you know what, Mr. or Mrs. Cop, you violated this person's constitutional rights. You don't have enough evidence. So we're not going to pursue this. We're going to reject this. The prosecutor has the power to do that. Or the prosecutor may say, okay, something like subconsciously, unconsciously say something like, well, this is a young black person. And there are a lot of young black people in my community who are part of gangs. Never say this where anyone can hear it other than other prosecutors, maybe friends or family members. So I'm going to go at them. I'm not going to cut them the break that I would cut, the white kid who is more likely to have had a gun, contraband, drugs, and so forth. I'm gonna go at this kid. Okay, I'm gonna go at it. He looks like a criminal, right? He just looks guilty. Okay, so I'm going to charge him. And I'm going to charge him, and I'm going to make my charging decision based on those unconscious or subconscious biases. That's why I say prosecutors are the gatekeepers. They can keep those kind of cases out of the system, or they can charge, if they decide to charge, they can charge someone with the appropriate charge. And we just dealt with that this week. We just disposed of a case this week where we thought that this case should have gone to trial. We wanted to try this case. We wanted to put this case in front of a jury. But our client was afraid to. And I need to talk about that a second. 8 out of 10 cases in the criminal justice system are disposed of by plea bargain. 8 out of 10. If folks forced prosecutors to try most cases in the criminal court system, that would shut down the criminal court system because there are just not enough prosecutors to try all those cases. And then you start getting into speedy trial issues and so forth. But they know that most people are going to plead those cases out of fear of being convicted at trial and getting a harsher sentence. And that's what they'll do. They'll put something on they'll make an offer. Okay, let's say it's an offense that carries 10 years in the penitentiary, and they'll offer, say, 3 years probation. Here we have something called deferred adjudication. They know they got a weak case. But they also know that that person is afraid to go to trial and risk getting those 10 years. And they also know they may have that person, the defendant, may also have an attorney who want to get rid of this case and doesn't really want to work on this case, doesn't really want to put in the work, doesn't really want to investigate, doesn't really want to do what is necessary to try to save this person's life or freedom or reputation. So the prosecutor knows I got the upper hand here. All right? I'm going to put this on the table, and at least I have this young black person on probation for the next however many years. And if they mess up, then I got them. And I'm going to put that on the table because they're probably going to do it, although I know I got a weak case, because they're afraid of going to trial. Some of these cases, folks, you need to take to trial. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Some of these cases, you need to force the prosecutor to prove their case. If you know you're not guilty, if you know it, that you didn't do it, then you should seriously consider going to trial. Chloe?
I mean, you said it, Dad. Unfortunately, we see this every day where our clients are afraid of the outcomes of what could happen at trial. And, we can't see into the future. We cannot predict what a jury does, but we know that the prosecutors have a weak case. So it comes down to, okay, we know the prosecutor has a weak case. And we don't believe they'll be able to meet their burden to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. But, the client has their life in their hands, and they'd rather take, this sure plea deal rather than forcing the prosecutor to prove its case at trial. And so it's just an unfortunate thing that we see, especially because, our black clients do not get the breaks from prosecutors that other defendants might get. We might be
Exactly.
able to negotiate something a little bit better for our other race of clients versus our black clients, especially if the black client is a young black male. And that is the upsetting part. And we can advise until we're blue in the face, but that type of decision comes down to the person, the defendant. And so it's just unfortunate that, prosecutors have so much power and can potentially bring, prejudices or biases or their perception of things or of this person into play when negotiating these deals. When here in Texas, the role of the prosecutor is to act in the interest of justice. What is justice in this case? In terms of the community, the alleged victim, they don't really become the victim unless the person pleads guilty or is found guilty. The alleged victim, as well as the person accused, who is presumed innocent until they plead guilty or are found guilty. So it's just this conundrum of different varying causes and effects that come into play, and it's just infuriating because we see it disproportionately negatively affecting our black clients.
All right, Chloe. What Wow. So we have gone now for an hour and 14 minutes. We got so much more to cover. We want to talk about judges. We want to talk about
Juries.
juries, grand juries, regular juries. We got so much to cover, and we don't have a time to get to all of it today. There are a couple of wrongful conviction cases that we want to talk about that are heart-wrenching and heartbreaking. You know, I just get tired of seeing black man after black man after black man after black man after black man spending 20, 30 years in prison, getting out, and only for who are innocent, and only for, somebody to say, I'm sorry, after they've spent 25, 30 years of their life in prison because of racial bias and racism in the criminal justice system. We got to talk about that. But unfortunately, we don't have enough time to do it today. So please, you all, please, we need to do part 2 of this, and we'll do it next week. Now, I want to strongly encourage you to come back, okay? To come back next week and get the rest of this. Whether you realize it or not, you're being empowered. You're being empowered. We are literally empowering you with information. Okay? Yeah, but we just can't do it all today. So, Chloe, what do you have on the brain before we get out of here?
So you all heard our opening statement. You have seen several pieces of evidence that we've put before you on how we feel the criminal justice system victimizes blacks. But we have not finished. There's a lot more evidence that we want to put in front of you about this. Just like my dad said, in terms of juries, judges, wrongful closing statement, and the conclusion of this case, and really indicting the criminal justice system itself. This is an indictment of the criminal justice system and how it discriminates against black folks. So stay tuned, come back, join us for part 2. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. Share part 1 with your family and friends. Let people know about us. Let people know about the Defiant Lawyers. And if they are defiant with us, if they have this nature to stand up against the government, against the harmful, to stand up for the powerless, you want to be a part of our community as a rebel. So we look forward to seeing you all next week. We will be back here. And with that, Dad, I wish everyone a happy Saturday, happy weekend. We'll see you next week for part 2.
This got a little bounce to it.
Hey. Yeah.
Just got to groove a little bit.
It makes you want to groove. Like some Baltimore bounce or something.
Yeah, I don't know what all that is. I'm old school. I'm old school.
You just know about that New York East Coast type.
Yeah,
that's
I'm straight up East Coast. Not so much New York, but because I'm a country boy, but yeah.
Well,
all right. Okay. We're out, Chloe. Bye.
Bye, y'all. Peace. Ever since I was a child, I've always hated bullies. I was that child. If I saw another kid getting picked on in class or at the lockers, I would stand up for that kid. I couldn't stand seeing bullying. But there was one incident with a teacher that almost silenced me. It is my first clear memory of racism and discrimination. It's still so vivid and clear in my head. I remember one day we were in class one afternoon. flowers on our faces in anticipation of the school event. So we all went one by one up to her so that she could paint our face. When it was my turn to get my face painted, my teacher told me, "I can't paint your face because your skin is too dark." I was mortified, embarrassed, and deeply ashamed. In that moment, even though I wanted to say something, I couldn't get the words out. So I walked back to my desk, I sat down, and I stared blankly at my desk until the bell rang. When I got home from school that day, my parents knew something was wrong. But I remember being so reluctant to tell them. I really don't know why. When I finally did, obviously they were furious. And let's just say the next day at school was one to remember. But this incident taught me a valuable lesson. It taught me to always stand up against racism, discrimination, and injustice. It fortified my resolve to fight for the vulnerable and voiceless. Just like my clients' voices are taken when they are wrongfully accused of a crime, subjected to banking while black, fighting for custody of their children, or fighting for just compensation from stingy insurance companies. My name is Attorney Chloe Corbett, also known as the Duchess of Justice. I am one half of Corbett & Corbett Law Firm and the Defiant Lawyers. We're here to fight for justice for the accused, the oppressed, the vulnerable, and the voiceless. You can find us in Dallas, Texas. Go to our website, www.corbettfirm.com. Improving lives and impacting laws.